This classic cut, great for any hair texture, inspire many of the latest trends. I'm Genia Church with Schwarzkopf Artistic Team Member, and I'm going to show you how. So great, we just came back from getting our client shampooed and prepped for her haircut. We shampooed her with BLONDME, All Blonde's rich shampoo and conditioner, followed by the mask. I love working with the BLONDME care products on my textured hair clients because textured hair has some of the same needs as blondes. Sometimes it can be fragile, need more nourishment, and definitely more moisture, and the Balm protection just seals the deal. So we're gonna get started in this shag haircut. Some of the clients have come in and asked for this haircut because they've seen, the wolf cut, the butterfly cut. A lot of those haircuts that you're seeing and hearing that are trending right now still goes back to a classic shag haircut. A lot of detail and customization happens as you're working with different textures of curly hair. With this curl pattern, she does have more of a looser curl. So this is gonna be perfect to really accentuate her curls, but also give her something that's new and different and fresh. So let's get started. So with the first step of this haircut, what you wanna do is first analyze your client's hair. So one of the key things that I look at first is the hair texture. Also, I'm gonna ask my client if she wears her hair straight and curly or if she always wears her hair curly. If my client wears her hair curly the majority of the time, then I am gonna cut it in its natural state. For me, that's gonna be the way that she wears it, so we want to see where those curls live and fall. If she wears it straight the majority of the time, but she wants to have the option of wearing it curly as well, then I'm gonna cut the hair straight. This particular client, we wanna go in with the curly cut because she wears her hair, curly 90% of the time. So like I said, we're gonna analyze the curl pattern of the hair. We're also gonna analyze the density. So I'm just really wanting to leave her hair in its natural state. It's still wet from being shampooed. And you see me just kind of lifting at the scalp just to see where everything lives and falls. Most often, clients are not gonna have the same texture of hair all over the head. So sometimes there's certain areas that may be a tighter curl pattern and there's other areas that may be a looser curl pattern. A lot of times what I see is that in some cases, due to length of the hair or just a texture difference, there may be longer lengths or straighter hair in the crown area and tighter in the nape area. So that could totally vary depending on your client. So just analyze that. And what that information does for you, it lets you know when you need to definitely be more aware of your tension and if you need to leave more length for the amount of shrinkage that would happen with a tighter curl pattern. So let's get started. We're gonna begin in the fringe area, just framing out the face and identifying where we wanna establish that perimeter outline. So I'm using the BLONDME leave-in spray conditioner. And I love using this as a cutting tool because it does, and especially on textured hair, it gives it much more slip and combability. And it's great when the hair is, especially with curly hair, sometimes it tends to dry much quicker. So this will help to keep that moisture in the hair a little bit longer as I'm cutting. Definitely want to use a wider tooth comb if you're working with a comb so that it puts less tension on the hair, minimum tension. And you always want to be aware of the natural fall as you're cutting. So now we're gonna begin our haircut with cutting this perimeter shape and identifying where we want that fringe to hit. So I'm gonna go right above the tip of the nose. And this is because when it shrinks or when the curls are really set, it's gonna give me a little bit of shrinkage here. And when it does, it's gonna frame her face really nicely. Also, once it dries, we can then go in and really detail and face frame even more if needed to customize the shape. As I'm just using my fingers to guide me, not really using it to put extra tension on the hair. I'm opening up this face shape here, really being mindful of what areas I want to accentuate and what areas I need to maybe minimize. So if our client has a fuller face, maybe we want to keep more length around this jawline area. However, if we're really wanting to open this up more, then we're gonna go in and just detail this out and just layer a little bit more around the face. Okay, now we're gonna go and transition to the other side. And we are going to just go back to center. So we really wanna make sure that we're checking for balance and symmetry as we're working through this haircut, because we're not having a really strong blunt line. We're actually working with more balance. So I'm constantly checking as I'm cutting. And that's why this is very important for you to stand in front of your client as you do this, or really work with your mirror so that you can see the balance. Periodically, you'll see me just kind of move the hair. And that is important. It's really about just letting the hair fall in its natural state and being a little more organic. Sometimes as we work, we can pull the hair in the direction that we want to cut. However, it's important for us to let the hair live exactly where it is. That's going to give us the most predictability as far as how the hair is going to fall. So we now completed the outline. Now we're going to go internal and begin to cut our layers. So now that we are starting our next section, we want to make sure that we keep the hair really nice and moisturized as we're cutting. So I like to use as a cutting tool BLONDME leave-in spray conditioner. I like this for a cutting tool, but I especially love it for textured hair clients because it keeps the hair really nice and moisturized, especially if we're doing any type of slide cutting or anything of that nature. It's going to be ideal to make sure that your shears just glide over the hair versus creating more friction. Can you guys tell me what kind of cutting lotions you use, especially on textured hair? I would love to hear the comments. So I am going to take a center back section that's about 1 inch wide, and I am going to pull this up over directed forward. And because we've already cut basically our perimeter outline guide from her fringe area, we know that this is going to balance, and we're going to create layers internally that support that. Sometimes we're going to keep it disconnected depending on the look that you're going for. However, this is going to be your visual guide of where we're going. So we see the back length and we see our front. This is going to be how we start to create this nice shattered shape and create more layers in the crown. So we are going to be cutting our section. It comes from the apex of the head and it goes down until the hair is no longer able to reach. So I would say basically right at the occipital bone. So from the apex to the occipital bone, we're going to pull everything up. First thing we want to do is find our angle here, and then we want to relax the tension. The key thing here, you see how tight and taut this hair is pulled? This is what we would generally do for a haircut. When you're working with textured hair, you really want to be mindful of your tension. That's why we're using a wider tooth comb. And then we're going to release the tension. And we're going to start cutting our guide. We're going to cut all the way out. Then we're going to allow that to drop. So what you can see is how this transition happens. We still maintain length, but basically we're carving out this internal section. So it's going to create more volume in the crown and it decreases around the sides. We are going to take a pivoting section. So we're starting here and then we're just going to pivot almost like pie shapes all around the heads, using the apex as the starting point of our guide. So everything travels up. Relax tension. We're gonna cut. So as we're working around the head, we are gonna be taking these pivoting sections that begin with our guide at the apex out to the ends. So we're just gonna continue to travel. As we work towards the front of the head, we will slightly over direct once we get to the hairline. Being mindful to release tension as you get your guide or your section, release tension. It's okay if the hair tends to fall out. That hair drops out and it retains the fullness throughout the bottom layer. So now we're gonna be working right at the hairline. So with this particular section, we're gonna over direct back, release tension. So now we should be able to start to see the shape. You can see how these shorter layers are really starting to create volume here. If you look at one side in comparison to the other side, it's definitely increased her amount of volume that she has in her crown area. So now we're gonna start back, center back, and then we're gonna work the opposite direction. I'm always cutting from my guide out. So release tension. So now we're at our hairline. We want to over direct back to the previous section, just for that one particular section to maintain the integrity of her hairline. A lot of people have more of a negative space in this area here, so this will just add fullness, because we can always go back in and then detail after we diffuse it and completely dried this style. We can go back in and customize it if we need to. So now we've completed the internal section. Now we're gonna go up to the top and just blend with the fringe area. So this just takes these two areas and blends them together by visually connecting and point cutting the hair in between. So we will take a center part, and we're taking the area from the back and point cutting this corner that's right here at the top. And we're only point cutting to the longest part of that fringe area. So we're gonna take the high point of that fringe and connect it with that back area just by point cutting to visually blend. The reason you don't want to cut that to that short fringe area is because it's going to remove a lot of your volume. And this is where, for curls, it really needs space and length to really play up the volume in that area. So if you go too short, you actually remove too much of that volume. So again, we're going to go back to the center. And we're going to take hair on either side of that guide. And we're going to repeat. If you're a newer stylist and you are uncomfortable point cutting, especially on textured hair, you want to make sure that you're cutting, you're closing as you exit versus going in and closing and point cutting. So basically I'm closing my shears as I go out. And I'm not cutting past that first knuckle. So now we're gonna go back to center. So this top section is basically gonna be from brow to brow, right above the parietal ridge. And all we're doing is we're basically taking 3 sections. So this center section, 1 section to the left, 1 section to the right. And then from there, we're gonna go in and just visually balance everything around the parietal ridge. What we're looking for, we're gonna see if we have any strong corners, because basically this haircut is all very organic. So it's very visual. There's gonna be shorter and longer pieces, which adds to the organic feel of the shag haircut on the textured hair. However, you're looking for anything that stands out. That's if there's a long piece that maybe you missed as you were doing your cross-checking on your top area and connecting it to the back. So you may see a little more in the areas that you over-directed back just because you left those a little longer intentionally. So in these areas, you may see a little more hair as you're going back through. However, I would recommend leaving the majority of that so you can customize it at the end, just to take account for density and curl texture. Okay, so now we've completed this portion of our haircut. Now we're gonna go into this back section here, and we're just gonna go in. There's some times, depending on how full the client's hair is in this area here, sometimes you may wanna leave this and customize this afterwards, after it's dry. However, there's also times that it may be too bulky, that you know you wanna remove some weight. And so everything under the occipital bone, what we do is we go in and layer this a little bit more at a 45-degree angle, and we'll go in and start that now. Going back to that center section. We're gonna hold everything out, and now we find our guide here. And we're gonna keep our perimeter. And what we're gonna do is basically slide cut or walk down all the way to the ends at a 45-degree angle. So when we pull this out, everything is gonna be at a 45-degree angle. So you can see there's still minimal tension. My fingers are being used just to guide the haircut. You can actually see how this shape is starting to concave down towards the nape, but it's created more layers, which will really play up the volume in the crown area in this midsection. So I'm using my finger here as a stabilizer. So as I'm walking my shears down, I'm really just opening and closing, but the control is coming from the stabilization of my finger. And the key with cutting curly hair, you definitely want to keep your shears nice and sharp. And then you want to make sure that you keep a cutting agent on it so it glides down the curls much easier without adding the additional friction on the hair. I like a cutting lotion that's going to be really lightweight so it doesn't weigh the hair down and cause the curls to clump together. This still allows my curls to move freely, so as I'm working through and using my hands to just move the hair around in its natural state, this really does work well. So if you have a product that's too heavy, the curls may clump together and you're not able to do that as well. The key thing as I'm working on this round shape is making sure that you're walking and taking a step with every section. So if I'm here, I'm cutting directly in front of my guide. Same thing as I walk and move with the guide. In this particular area, you do want to slightly over direct if your client has a really weak perimeter outline. So if the hair tends to get thinner in this area, you definitely want to over direct to the previous section. So right here, right behind the ear, you want to make sure that in this area, you slightly over direct to the previous section. Okay, so now we're just basically lightly dusting this perimeter outline just to clean it up, and then she'll be ready to diffuse. And once we diffuse our client, then we can go in and customize this haircut if we need any additional detailing work that needs to be done. So now we're gonna begin our diffusing, and I am using OSiS Bounty Balm, which is great for anti-frizz as well as a great heat protectant. And it's a light, basically natural hold. It's gonna give a natural finish to the hair, but it's gonna help to define those curls. So let's get started. Because I want to maintain the fullness in her hair, I'm really not gonna go in and put too much product at her root area. Because I want to create and keep most of the fullness in her hair, I am going to mainly focus on refining the ends and keeping the product free on her scalp. And what that's gonna do is just allow for more fullness to be maintained in the root area. So now we're gonna go in and diffuse. That we finished applying the product, we're gonna go in, diffuse, and then do some light refinement at the end. It's important for you to remember, after you diffuse, we're really just diffusing so we can see shape and balance, so we can go in and do more refinement. Key things, if you're looking for something that's gonna be full and accentuate their texture and the fullness of their texture, then definitely don't go in with too much product at the roots. You wanna allow the roots to really swell and get bigger so it supports the texture that you have on the ends. However, it is gonna be great for us to just see how the hair naturally falls. So now we're gonna go in and do some refinement. Key thing here is the same thing we did before. This haircut is all about balance and symmetry and making sure that we're analyzing the shape as well as her face shape. As I'm looking at this, I really see, I'm liking what I'm seeing here as far as the shape. I am gonna do more refinement. So we're just gonna pick up the curls, and I am actually going inside the curl and I'm cutting down the strand. So I'll still retain the length, but I'm actually taking weight out internally. And what that's gonna do, even if the hair is curly or textured, it's still gonna create internal layering. It's creating space for the curls to live. With curly hair, a lot of times you have curls sitting on top of curls, but we wanna create space for the curls to sit into. So what we're doing is removing that internal weight, allowing space for those curls to sit and live and create more of an airy and natural feel to the hair. So sometimes as you're watching curly haircuts, you see people cutting the hair dry first and creating a design prior to doing anything else. I like to create what is a hybrid haircut where we still have structure to the haircut, we're analyzing the hair shape, still allowing it to live in its natural state. However, I do want to cut it in the way that they are going to wear their hair the majority of the time. What I find by doing that is it still gives me nice form and structure, so that if the client does wear their hair straight or curly, it's going to be a well-balanced haircut either way. This way, it allows us to just refine the things as we see it, you know, in its natural state, completely dried. We can do refinement in this way. However, I do feel like having a more structured foundation to start with is the best thing for me and my clients. Thanks for watching this take on the modern shag haircut for curly hair. Be sure to watch for creative content. Please like and comment below.